But I do want to ask a few Nike Plus questions. Sure. As a Nike fanboy myself. How much of the idea of, or a sketch of the ecosystem did you guys have when you were initially working on the idea of Nike Plus? And how much of it was we could put a sensor in the shoe and that would be cool?
Yeah. I don't think the idea of ecosystems even existed in 2005. Mm-hmm. The thing that really unlocked this new world is the smartphone.
Yeah.
So you think about the smartphone becoming the remote control of your life, and back then there weren't smartphones, and so I don't think ecosystems were even part of the mentality. What we called these things back then were platforms, and the idea, could you create a technology that could become a part of the everyday life of a consumer? And is this something that you could do even for a non-technology company or brand like Nike? So the goal back then was to create something that could be part of your everyday life, that became something that helped you achieve your goals. It fit perfectly with the brand, but it was solving the problem through technology. Nike's brand was always about inspiring and enabling athletic performance. And the enablement for Nike was always around the engineering of their products, like the shoes. And the inspiration came from all of their iconic marketing and advertising, all the athletes that they sponsored. But the idea of inspiration and enablement works very well with technology. Could you find a technology that does that? And that's what we found with Nike Plus. We found that it motivated runners. It got people who were never interested in running to participate for the first time in their lives. So in that sense, it was successful as a life-changing technology. Mm-hmm. But there was no concept back then of that it could go beyond that into an ecosystem.
Right. And in terms of now fast forwarding to today, let's say if you're working at a company or planning to do a startup or something and you had an ecosystem in mind, what is the best way to sort of build out and architect an ecosystem going forward? How much of it can be planned,
right,
or rough drafted ahead of time, and how much of it do you need to see how people are using products and see where the consumers want to go next?
Right. So I think most companies are still organized in the horizontal world. That's still the dominant business model, even though companies that are still organized that way are struggling. The thing that you have to do is to take the categories that you're involved in, and you have to make this first 90-degree shift to create some sort of a service platform that connects together those categories.
I see.
And so ecosystems always start with, if you look at that diagram, each of those little black dots, we call that a node. And so you've got to create that very first node that begins to create a connection between legacy products. The problem with companies and their organization is that many of them are organized in this horizontal fashion. So if a company like Coke, using them again as the example, there'd be a brand manager for Diet Coke, another brand manager whose job is to grow the Fanta business in a market. So when you're organized at that level, there's nobody who can think at the level of an ecosystem, because ecosystems don't typically work at the level of a single product. Right. So you've got to have somebody who sits at a category level. Companies like Nike had to completely reorganize their business in order to get where they are.
Whose job should the ecosystem, thinking about the ecosystem, be? Is that a chief innovation officer's job? Is that a chief operating officer's job? Who is best positioned to kind of look for where that can begin to take place?
The natural alliance of ecosystems is between typically the CMO and the CIO.
Okay.
And it's interesting because those two organizations historically never had to work together.
Right.
They worked in completely different parts of the organization. And the digital revolution, the connected age, actually forced those two to come together in a partnership. Since the beginnings of this, we have seen the emergence of chief digital officers, chief innovation officers, and so some companies are choosing to approach it slightly differently. But the natural alliance is between marketing and IT.
Mm-hmm. And how important is it? How important is the role of partnership? So obviously, in the two examples that you cite, Nike and Apple obviously have had a long historic relationship, and shared board members and staff had gone back and forth between the two companies. But you also think about something like the advent of the iTunes store. Right. The first TV show you could watch on your video iPod was, Desperate Housewives, which is an ABC show, which was owned by Disney, which, was a close partner of the Apples for a long time. So how important is that, or is that a feature of the sort of advent of the the business model?
I think ecosystems are impossible to do without partnerships because no company can build every single aspect or provide every element of the experience. And so, looking at Beko as an example, we've seen with major appliance manufacturers integrating in Amazon Dash technology as an example.
Right.
That's a natural partnership of replenishment of the key things that you need to wash clothing. So the idea that you can just push a button on the washing machine and it replenishes itself with detergent is something that is natural for a partnership because obviously most manufacturers of washing machines are not in the business of selling detergent. Right. So I think these things become critical. And there's almost no ecosystem I can think of that's successful that doesn't have a myriad of different partnerships.
Right. However, as a consumer, some of these ecosystems lock you in, right? I mean, it's hard to go to be a Google customer and then decide I want to now move into Apple's ecosystem without buying a whole bunch of stuff all over again. How much of that is a sort of essential feature of this kind of thinking, this kind of way of organizing a company, and how much of it is a sort of temporary feature of where we are now with the technology?
I think in the early days it's going to be more proprietary, but over time we might find that some ecosystems open up. But I think we're seeing for the first time that certain categories which struggled historically for creating a reason why a consumer would buy two products from them are now finding this as a potential opportunity. I didn't get to show the Fossil case study, but here you have a jewelry and watch manufacturer, and they have a number of different sub-brands they manufacture under Michael Kors and Tory Burch and a number of different fashion brands. And if you happen to like the style, then you might go out and buy two. But if there's an underlying platform that you actually use and enjoy, you might be more compelled to stay within the Fossil family as an example. Think about the car industry where many of us have multiple cars in our household, but very few of us have two from the same manufacturer. There was no reason ever to do that other than perhaps your love of the brand and loyalty to the brand. But I think we're going to see with cars that have more of a technology ecosystem, once our car understands our media habits, our driving habits, et cetera, it's going to compel us to maybe want to stay within that so that the data can be shared across vehicles. And if I were a car company, I would not want that data to be shared across multitude of different companies, at least in the short term. Right. But I think the consumer value, the exchange of being inside of these closed systems is that it'll make our life easier. Right. So that's the trade-off that I think a lot of people will be willing to make.
When companies are trying to build out an ecosystem, where do they most often go wrong? I think of Amazon, which has had some incredible successes. Right. Amazon Prime is this huge success. Alexa, obviously the Kindle, but then the company's also faltered when it tried to do its own phone, that didn't really quite work out, et cetera. So what is when people come to RGA or they ask you about this, where do they most often go wrong when they're trying to add nodes?
A myriad of different ways. I mean, it's easy to get something wrong. I think you have to look at these things as experiments over time. Nike famously launched the Fuel Band in 2012, and then they decided to pull back from the market. Right. And now companies like Fitbit have built multi-billion-dollar businesses. Nike's decision at the time was to focus more on the software side, possibly that they regret that they did that, and they might have been better off if they had stayed continuing to make hardware for a bit longer. But you can see how any of these things could potentially go wrong. No different than in the horizontal world where companies launch products all the time that don't succeed and they pull back. I think the difference is that when you go wrong with an ecosystem, you don't lose like your entire customer base. Right. You find other things, and there's always learning and data that come off of these failures constantly.
I see. And I mean, how important are the metrics, I guess? I mean, I thought it was interesting in your presentation, the Nike stuff represented a lot of services, a lot of products, a lot of different ways of getting at consumers, but you still use the market share for running shoes, so as a sort of metric of success. So how important is it to say we are measuring the impact of this strategy in ways other than we would have measured the impact of, let's say, a really good advertising campaign for shoes or a new technology or a new product?
Yeah. I think that fundamentally growth is the main objective of most companies, and what we've seen is this dramatic shift in the core business model the dying of an old model that reliably created growth for decades, now being supplanted by this new model that is in many ways a lot more complicated. Most companies aren't organized to do, but I think it's mainly aimed at growth. The thing is that the companies that are getting in early and are pioneering this are gaining these advantages over the non-participants because of the data. The data is something that was never possible until now. The kind of data that companies who are ecosystem players are collecting is game-changing. You see companies like Facebook, Apple, I think the 5 of the 6 companies that sit at the top of global market cap are ones that have data that just no other company has. And so I think data is going to become the differentiating factor on whether a company is successful going forward or not. And that's happening very quickly.
So when you're working with a company like Nike, how often should they be thinking about refreshing the ecosystem, adding nodes, taking nodes away? I mean, how do you achieve balance, I guess, ecosystem balance to
Yeah, I think once you make the shift from horizontally integrated companies to connected ecosystems, you've made the shift from kind of like a product planning roadmap to a technology roadmap. And so within technology roadmaps, because the development cycles are quite long, these things are planned out quite far in advance. And most companies that are active in this way of building their business are planning these things for the long haul.
I see. So we are getting questions from the audience,
Okay.
which is great. So Winston asks, how do you integrate a horizontal or vertical system into a sort of ecosystem strategy? How do you manage the transition?
I think most companies are going to continue to horizontally integrate because it's easier for them to do. But I think the way to make the leap to ecosystems is what I mentioned earlier. You have to take that first 90-degree turn. For me, I think the big turn with Apple was not just the invention of the iPod, but it was actually the creation of the Apple Music Store. And if you think about it, why would a company like Apple that is known for hardware and software go out and do this crazy deal to get involved in the retailing of music? So it's one of these kinds of leaps forward inside of a company where you find yourself making a turn that goes against what you've done historically throughout most of what your company's known for. That's that very first big leap forward, and that's the beginning of how you get out. Now, even companies like Apple still have a horizontal orientation to some degree. It's not as if they just make one of each of their products. They have different sizes and different variations of each one. So the idea that you're going to completely walk away from horizontal integration is not what I'm trying to say. It's this added dimension of connecting together the things that you make. That's the differentiation, the change. And you have to do it by making one of these first leaps into something that's often outside of what you're known for.
Yeah. How much of this is dependent on, how does retail play into all of this? I remember a famous Business Week cover story when the Apple Store strategy launched that said, "Congratulations, you've saved Apple, but the stores are never going to work," right?
Right.
It turned out that now we see Amazon is testing its own stores. Google has tested various outlets. How important is this sort of
I think omnichannel,
ministry?
Omnichannel retail is just part of the world of connected ecosystems. The idea that the way we shop for things is changing is no different from the idea that the products that we use are becoming more and more connected. The idea that shopping is going to be simplified, it's going to know more about what our needs are, anticipate needs, be able to serve us at the level of like one-to-one is something that we as consumers are going to start to expect. And whether that requires you to have your own stores, which I think Apple decided that in order for their ecosystem to work, they needed that, or whether you think you can do it with partners is an open question. But clearly, the idea of creating a connected ecosystem has to stretch all the way into the way that people shop and buy the things that your company makes.
Interesting.
Look at Beko. Can they sell a whole connected home to a consumer through somebody else's retail channel? Or are they going to need their own stores?
Right.
Good question.
Yeah. How much does it impact thinking this way or strategizing this way? Impact the way you talk to consumers? Does it shift away the sort of proposition of this product is really good at doing this and this product is really good at doing that, to a live the Amazon lifestyle, and that means this, or live the Apple lifestyle, or the Belco app,
Yeah, I think you
Does
see
it
it in
change
the
the
Becco video,
advertising?
right? You're not selling a point solution like, here, buy this, it will wash your clothes for you. You're selling a whole lifestyle, right? So a lot of the way that we've tried to position these products for Nike are around the enablement of using technology to enable whatever your athletic dreams are, whatever your ambitions and goals are, that these things will unlock that. So it does shift somewhat. Most ecosystems don't work at the level of single products, they work at the level of entire categories. And so when you get up to the level of categories, you're typically looking at somebody's life. You're not looking at this one thing, this one product that I'm trying to get you to buy. You're looking at solving somebody's hydration lifestyle. And believe me, there's connected water products that are in the works
Coming soon, right.
inside of all the big beverage companies. They're beginning to think of this world in the same way.
Right.
That the future of beverages is not to sell you this one single bottle. It's to figure out a way to get hydration or refreshment integrated into all the moments and occasions in your life where you need it.
So when you're starting these conversations, is it important to start with a kind of values and big vision kind of conversation, and sort of imagining a film like the one you presented for Belco, or is it better to start at the products level, thinking, well, we have an oven that can do this, or we have a connected door lock, or
I think what we're seeing is the companies that have the hello. Maybe hand me the mic over there. Is it back on? Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. The companies that are proving to be the most adept at making this shift are the ones that have a very clear sense of purpose or mission, like Nike. So Nike's purpose, which goes all the way back to the founders, was not, we're going to be a great shoe company. They never said that, ever. Mm-hmm. They said that we are a brand that's going to inspire and enable athletic performance. And by the way, if you have a body, you're an athlete. That was the famous quote of Bill Bowerman, the founder of Nike and co-founder. And that type of purpose or mission enables you to go down any path that looks like you can deliver against that. And you contrast that with companies whose perhaps purpose or mission is to just be really great at making this one thing. It doesn't lead to ecosystem thinking. So I do think that brand purpose is critical to the success of companies, and it's been proven over and over again. My good friend Jim Stengel, who's the former chief marketing officer at P&G, wrote a book called Grow, where he analyzed a number of Fortune 500 companies. And the thing that was one of the defining characteristics across the ones that have been successful in the last few decades has been whether or not they have a clear sense of purpose or mission.
I'm going to paraphrase this very eloquently written question here. Do you think these models tend to take people, to take companies toward a model of renting the things that they make more than selling them? So if you think of, the vision that Mark Fields, the CEO of Ford, has painted for the company, is one where you might have a car sharing program, you might have a taxi program, you might own a Ford, you might not own a Ford, and that's fine. But as long as you're thinking about all your mobility needs through, the blue Ford logo, then that's a sort of win. Is that a shift that you see continuing and spreading through other industries, or is that limited?
Certainly cars are a little bit unique because it's such a big ticket, but we're going to hear from Ford later today, so maybe the question will be answered differently. But I think when you look at the car category, we've clearly seen, just in the last 3 years perhaps, dramatic shift from horizontal thinking to ecosystem thinking. Every single car company is thinking about how to become an ecosystem of products and services, and included in that ecosystem is this idea that maybe you don't always have to own the car, that it could be based on more of a shared economy or a rented economy, et cetera. Or a hybrid where you own cars, but it makes it easy for you to rent when you go to other locations. I think all of these things are part of what that industry and that category will represent going forward.
All right, well, we're running out of time, so I'll just ask one more question. Do you think all of this puts a greater emphasis on the overall brand of a company rather than the individual products?
I think so, and I think we're seeing it reflected in the fact that the companies that have achieved these ecosystems have just these eye-popping valuations in the marketplace, and they're valued so much higher a company like Apple, I don't think no company in history had ever been valued that highly. And Google, close second. So yeah, I do think that the ones that have been successful at this, at that level, have created a brand differentiation that is unprecedented.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.